Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of the third episode of Season 4 of Lower Decks, called In the Cradle of Vexilon. And the ship arrives at a Dyson ring, which is a mega structure around a small star, an artificial world controlled by an ancient computer called Vexilon, and the population there are entirely devoted to art. They're all artists and they only paint and do sculptures and stuff like that. This reminds me of the TNG episode about the planet Aldea, which also had a computer controlling everything, so they only devote themselves to art and philosophy and stuff like that. And it's always fun to see a mega structure, even though recently we saw it in the Book of Boba Fett with the Mandalorian episode, who also went to such a place. And in season 4 of Discovery, when they went to meet the 10C species, they also lived in Dyson rings, even though we only saw it from the outside. But there are a bigger variety of such possible theoretical megastructures, and so why does it always have to be the ring structure? What about an O'Neill cylinder, for example? That will be bigger and more interesting. And another problem is that they always show it in a too small of a scale. Whenever they show it in The Mandalorian or in this show, we see the ship next to it, and it makes the whole structure seem really small. And if it's supposed to be a star in the middle, if it's an actual sun in the middle, then everything should be much bigger than how it looks like. And so that's a small nitpick I have. I realize they have to make it smaller to be able to fit it in the screen, and so that we'll be able to see what's going on, because a real structure like that would be so huge that you wouldn't be able to see the whole thing and all of that. So I realize they have to make it a smaller scale. Still, I wish they would somehow show it to be bigger as it should be. And also show some different variety. There are so many other ideas like that. And since we just recently saw the same exact idea in Star Wars, why not show one of the other ideas in this show? So I wish they would add some more variety and show it in a proper scale and all of that, but it's still nice. It's still better than just a normal planet, because it's much more interesting. And we see the ring is apparently spinning, so that's the source of the artificial gravity, but I'm guessing there's also some kind of force field keeping the air in, because the structure is so small, gravity alone would not be enough to keep all the atmosphere in there. And the supercomputer is inside the structure, and everything is made of stone. Even its control panels are made from stone. And that whole style reminds me of Stargate SG-1, which always showed kind of ancient technology which is very superior, and yet it's all made from stones and stuff like that, which was always kind of silly and funny, but I kind of like it. I guess it was a stylistic choice by the original designers that everything should look like it's made from stones. And the computer seems to be really nice, and it replicates cold tea for them, but suddenly it's hot because the computer is malfunctioning, and so Jack burns his hand. And that reminds me of a scene from Strange New Worlds when that Klingon burned his hand. And that's a complaint I have about the recent Star Trek shows, that a lot of stuff seems to be repetitive. Like, I keep seeing the same exact ideas and scenes, even jokes, in all the recent Star Trek shows. Like that joke about, every captain has to have his own saying when going to warp, he has to have a unique way to say it. And then the captain decides to try to fix the computer by herself, since she minored in ancient technology in the academy, something like that. And meanwhile, Boimler is given his first command over a team of ensigns, and he has to go and replace some power cells in some outpost, which Starfleet left there, I guess. And those devices in the room seem really similar to the warp engine of the NX-01, so maybe the first contact with this place happened back then, and that's why it looks like that. So it was never explained. I guess so. I guess it's possible. And Boimler is so worried about messing things up that he has to do everything himself. He doesn't allow his subordinates to do anything. He just shows them what to do and does all the work by himself. And the lesson here is that he should trust them and allow them to do some of the work as well. And meanwhile, on the Cerritos, Mariner, Rappaport, and Tandy go to some storage room and see some member berries, as always. And it kind of feels too much in some places. Like, the show is constantly bombarding us with tons of member berries, which is fun to me personally, but I realize if some people will get annoyed by that because it's kind of too much at places. So we see the storage room, and we see that probe from the inner light, and we see that sword that Spock fought Kirk with, and we see the Nomad probe, the one that wiped Uhura's memories, which, by the way, might be a clever way to explain some of the continuity issues between Strange New Worlds and TOS, such as how come Uhura never remembered Spock's future wife when she saw her on the screen, even though she was on the same ship just a few years earlier, and yet Uhura never heard about her, so maybe it was because of the memory wipe by Nomad, which they never fixed by the end of that episode. They just said they'll retrain her by everything. Maybe that's why her Klingon got so much worse later on, that she wasn't able to speak Klingon without having a bunch of books near her in Star Trek 6. And so we can use stuff like that to explain continuity issues. And we see that game from the worst episode of Deep Space Nine. And I remember that was the episode which made me stop watching Deep Space Nine for a while after that. So I still consider it one of the worst episodes ever. And Tandy tells Rappaport to stay away from the spider if he doesn't want his head to fall off and crawl away, something like that. That kind of reminds me of the movie The Thing, in which that happened. And we see that box from season 1 of TNG that was, I think, a Betazoid gift box or something with that face that talks with you, and so they poke fun at that. Then they're sent on a mission to find a faulty isolinear chip, and they have to manually scan all the chips until they find it, and they're angry since they were promoted. Why are they still doing the work of ensigns and cadets? Then they decide that officer who commanded them to do it must be messing with them, so they set up some kind of trap for him in his quarters with all those dangerous objects from that storage room. But then Rappaport accidentally trips it, and then he goes into that game from Deep Space Nine, and then he has to speedrun his way through that game, which has basically all the same scenes from that terrible Deep Space Nine episode. And just as he gets out of that game, he accidentally activates that memory probe, which shoots a beam at him, but then he uses that box with the face to block it, and then that box is the one that experienced a whole lifetime in that probe, and then says it misses his wife. That's probably the funniest part in this whole episode. And the only thing that kind of bugged me is that this probe is really tiny compared to the one we saw in TNG. I guess we never really saw its exact size, but when it was compared next to the ship, it seemed to be a big structure, and yet here it's really tiny, so maybe it's not the exact same one, maybe it's a similar design, maybe a more advanced one. And so for a moment I was worried about Rappaport, that he's the one who's going to experience a whole lifetime, that he's going to have to speed run through that as well to get back to reality, but then it was that box with the face that experienced it. So that was kind of funny. So it's a really clever mix of different member bearers together into one scene. So anyway, back in the ring structure, Boimler finally agrees to allow his team to do some of the work and not do everything himself, and so they're able to save the situation in the last second and reboot that computer and get it back to normal, because it was going haywire, creating volcanoes and all of that. And the way they showed that computer screen as a giant monolith kind of reminded me of Space Odyssey, and then Boimler dies in an explosion and he's actually dead, and then he wakes up in this strange room, which is also very similar to the ending of Space Odyssey. And then he sees that glowing koala, which in a few times in this show they mention that this is some kind of deity. And if you actually reverse the dialogue of the koala, you'll see that it says, "It is not your time, Boimler, you must go back," something like that. And then he wakes up back in reality. And back in the ship, they reveal that the annoying officer was in fact messing with them, and then he sends his ferret to mess with Rappaport, and that kind of reminded me of a scene from Starship Troopers, when that guy was sending his pet to mess with people, so it might be a reference, or maybe it's just an amazing coincidence. So overall I enjoyed the episode, and as I said before, I think many of these jokes simply wouldn't work on someone who doesn't have an extensive knowledge of Star Trek, since, for example, that scene with the probe being activated and sending a beam to your brain, if you didn't see the episode The Inner Light, then you wouldn't know what it's doing, and then you wouldn't get the joke. And so it's aimed for people who know the old Star Trek shows. So if you didn't and you just start Star Trek with this show, then you wouldn't get half of these jokes, and then it simply wouldn't be as funny. So that's my opinion. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.